Welcome to Act Dad, the awesome dad show. Brandon, I am really excited to chat with you tonight. How are you doing?
I'm good, Mark. Really excited to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Man, I'm really honored to have you on the show tonight. I think you've got a great message to spread. I saw your TEDx Toronto presentation, and I thought it was phenomenal. So
Okay.
I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your story.
Okay.
So, Brandon, I'm going to start. We could go into your backstory a little bit, but I want to start here with the Black Daddies Club. How rewarding has the Black Daddies Club been to you as a father?
I mean, it's been really rewarding, man. Like, I think as we're sort of talking about a bit before the call or the interview, I think the Black Daddies Club really selfishly was for a gap that I see in my own life, like a need that I had, a need that I didn't see in Toronto in terms of support for Black fathers, and to be honest, there wasn't much spaces for fathers in general, regardless of culture or race. But I think a space where just by Black men and Black fathers gathering, you're sort of demystifying this myth that Black fathers don't exist or not, taking a role in their kids' life. So being in a room full of folks or being in a barbershop full of folks, men talking about their lived experience, and also seeing bits and pieces of your own stories within these narratives are super key. For one part, you realize that you're not isolated. You realize you're not going through stuff alone. And more importantly, as you touched on, I get to learn a lot. I get to learn a lot from different men, and even moms and different guardians or whatever, like different stories that I'm able to put into my own toolkit, my own arsenal to like parent my kids.
Community is incredibly important, I think, for whatever your goals are, but for fathers especially. Okay. So let's backtrack a little bit. All right. Going back to your upbringing, you're born in Jamaica.
Yeah.
Which beautiful country, by the way. I got a chance to visit it a couple years ago. Really wonderful. Got to see not only the touristy places, but got to travel up. Man, I don't know how you guys drive on those roads. They're pretty gnarly, going up the mountains and people are honking and stuff. It's crazy. But Brandon, so tell me a little bit about your upbringing in Jamaica and how that's impacted the way that you're fathering now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the relationship with my dad growing up, like I was one of 7 kids he had with different moms. So, it was a lot it was hard for him to sort of split himself, so to speak, to be there for all of his children equally. Yeah.
Sure.
And I think what I took from that was, I think growing up, there was a lot of like, not just broken promises, but there's a lot of like hurt in terms of like shit, like, not really spending as much time as you want with them. And then sort of like when you do spend time, you try to like, the time seemed like it went quickly, too quickly, right? And I think once it wrapped, you knew that you didn't know when the next time you're going to connect, which was challenging. And I think taking that in terms of like into my own children, when my first son was born, I was sort of like super like, yo, I want to be engaged. I want to do the diaper changing. I want to make sure my partner is sleeping, and I would take turns to like have my kids sleep on my chest on the couch, and then you go through the fuck ups of like you're waking up midway, so you hear your kid on the ground falling because they roll off your stomach because like it's like this it's like there's no guideline, there's no blueprint in terms of this thing, but all I knew was that I wanted to change this cycle that was happening in my own lineage, right? And then on the flip side, there was like, I grew up, there wasn't, in terms of the media, there wasn't that many shows or imagery that showed Black fatherhood in a positive light, with the exception of the Cosby shows, right? So, I mean, the Cosby's show now, or Bill Cosby now, has a different set of meanings than when it did when I was growing up, right? Like, I think the Cosby shows, and obviously there's certain, you know, it doesn't necessarily capture the reality of like the majority of Black men. Not all Black men are doctors and their wives are lawyers, but I think this idea of like the father being present, co-parenting in this positive way was really important for me to sort of say, okay, this is something that I want to sort of like emulate. But then as a young father at 21, I realized like I was nowhere near the Cosbys or Bill Cosby. So it was important for me to sort of create a space where there was more, like a more of a realistic space where Black fathers could talk about what we're going through, you know, and support each other.
Absolutely. So I think you hit on something that's really important. The media in general, what you see on TV, it doesn't always show fathers in a great light. Black fathers, white fathers, Hispanic, what have you. They're always kind of like the doofus, or they're kind of like second to mom. Like mom takes care of everything or fixes up all the mess ups that dad has.
Right.
And I found that to be a very destructive message to fathers in general and to children growing up. Like, okay, now I'm a dad. I guess I've just downgraded my life, when it's really not like that at all. And I really got to commend you for breaking the cycle. I think that's something that we really need to focus on. Was there any reason in particular, Brandon, why you decide, hey, I want to really be engaged, I really want to be involved? Was there something that why did you make that decision?
Well, I think there's a couple things, right? I think the first reason of like how Black Daddies Club really came about, it's, you know, in 2004, my father got murdered in Jamaica by an 11-year-old kid. That 2 weeks later, he was murdered by the same people who hired him to kill my father. You know, and going back to Jamaica for the funeral, but also to speak to the police officer that was handling the case. He said something that like struck a chord, and he was like, in this sort of normal, this sort of like nonchalant way, that this is normal. Like this fact that this young kid killed my dad and then was killed later on was normal. And for me, it was sort of, that was really disturbing, you know, that he was normalizing this thing. But then I think for me, the light bulb was the fact that that there's a normalization of crisis within Black communities, regardless if it's in Jamaica or if it's in Brooklyn or if it's here in Toronto. And I didn't want to just be apathetic anymore, right? I wanted to like do something, because up to that point, I was sort of, you know, in my own bubble. You know what I'm saying? I would work, go home, watch the news and be like, oh, that's messed up, and then go to sleep. You know, and then when this happened, I was like looking for this public outcry, but there wasn't any, and realizing like I want to be a part of the solution. I don't know what the solution looks like, but I didn't want to just kind of stand on the sidelines and just whatever, you know what I'm saying? And Black Daddies Club didn't come right away. I think it came around like 6 years later, a few years later, because you know, I had to go through whatever grieving process I needed to go through. But I think what was coming up for me was that I was looking for, like, there's things happening as a young parent, as a young partner, transitioning from boy to manhood to fatherhood, but not really having your father to go and talk to, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. I remember going to get married and wishing, you know, I was sort of like hoping in this weird way, like I was missing the talk. Like I would picture, like I would have with my kids when they're gonna get married, of, you know, that talk the father has with the son to say, yo, you're going over to this next chapter and you got to step it up and whatever. And I had to sort of like talk that to myself and sort of like imagine what it would have been like if he was there, you know. and I think for me, it's like having 3 Black sons it's not for them to have a similar experience. For their experience around fatherhood, um, me being present is to be normal. You know what I'm saying? Where um, sometimes, you know, when I was growing up, or when these guys are growing up, and I would like go to the park, or um, you know, do little things. Like for me, these were like very big moments. You know what I'm saying? But they're like normal things. They're very normal things. And I think that's really the purpose. A lot of this work that I do with Black Daddies Club, it's mimicking my own life, and it's informed by my own life, and it's selfishly it's about looking how to improve myself as a father. You know.
Well, it's kind of like iron sharpens iron, right? You get with other people that are like-minded, because the problem is this, right? You grow up without having a father like really there teaching you all these different things, and then when you finally make that jump to fatherhood, he's not there because he's tragically taken from this world. So you can't say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? So where do you go? What ends up happening, I think, in a lot of places, not just in Black communities, but in all communities, is kids turn to who's the cool kid. You know, it's the guy selling the drugs, or the guy I see on TV, and they're not always the ones who are living the best lifestyle.
For sure. But I mean, you know, the interesting thing is, I think my mom being a single mother, because like when we migrated to Toronto, she had this task of like, okay, how do I teach my only child, who's a young man, how to be a man and as a woman, right? So I think what she did was she exposed me, like, you know, I have some uncles that's here in Toronto. So she would like for March break or summer break, I would go and spend time with her brothers, my uncles. And one of my uncle, for me, he was sort of like the first, like not just this one particular uncle, but I think a lot of my uncles are like, those are it was really important, I think, to sort of see these different types of masculinity. So for example, this one particular uncle, raising boys himself, him and his wife, you know, all 3 of them, like he was very involved. Like I would wake up, and he's making porridge, you know, for everyone to eat. And it was like, yo, you know, like I'm seeing him in the kitchen cooking, and like this is simple, but like to see a man cooking was very like, what's going on here? And this was like dope, you know what I'm saying? And you know, he would coach his kids' soccer teams, drive them to practice. All 3 of his kids went to Division II universities on scholarships in the States. And I think for me, the fact that I wasn't raised with my pops in the home, it was a blessing and a curse in some ways, right? It was a curse in a sense of like, you know, not having that energy, that masculine energy on call, on will. However, the blessing was I was able to sort of pick and choose different aspect of masculinity or masculinities that I found that worked. I didn't have to download everything from one person and say, this is the archetype that I have to follow. But it gave me agency to be like, yo, I want to be a pop that cooks. I want to be a pop that is involved. And then I was also influenced by certain men who were on the block, you know what I'm saying? That were like doing some of the stuff that some of the men were like, yo, some guys who were, whether they're selling drugs or whatever, they took ownership of some of the community and be like, yo, if they saw you skipping school, these were the men who were like, yo, what are you doing? Get back into school. You know what I'm saying? Like, so there was this, a bit of a piece of sort of like the school of hard knocks, and then also like this traditional or non-traditional views of maleness that I was able to sort of create like a hodgepodge of sort of like, I was able to make my own and define my own masculinity, which I thought was dope and really important.
it sounds to me like your mother made a very, very smart choice to say, hey, how can I put my son in a position to succeed? I think a lot of people, so I don't want to generalize, but I think it's sometimes when there's a relationship that's so broken for whatever reason, or something horrible happens, the mom or the dad say, oh, I'm going to do it all myself.
Right.
But I think kids growing up, they really need to have that positive male role model.
For sure.
So, I mean, do you ever think about, hey, what would have happened if my mom hadn't put me in a position to be around a positive male?
I don't know. I mean, it could have ended in a different direction, because I do see, I've seen the different examples when certain folks doesn't have that energy, But I also recognize that there's been different men throughout my life that's been like instrumental. So one of my best friends in high school, his pops wasn't like the regular kind of dad, you know what I'm saying? Like, he took a real interest in his son's friends who came to the home, to their home. Like, he would treat us like we're an extension of his family, And I thought that was really, really dope, So what I mean by that is, we would come over to his house after school, and he would come and he'd be like, hey, Brandon, what's going on? How's school going? He had a moving company, and I wasn't working at the time. This was like grade 9, grade 10. And he's like, one Saturday, he's like, hey, do you want to come do a job with me? You know what I'm saying? And I went, did the job. I damaged the person's wall that we're moving in, but he still paid me the full amount. And like, it was a good, it was just nice. He didn't have to do that. But I think he understood that parenting is more than just about parenting your own household. You know what I'm saying? It's sometimes it means parenting the community of kids that is congregating with your own children. He was smart, and I take that same approach to my kids' friends. So like, I'll introduce myself, or I'll talk to them. And this, when, the same way I'll ask my kids if they've done their homework, if their friends are around, I ask them if they're doing the same thing, right? Not to like overstep, but let them know that they're cared about. You know what I'm saying? That they're not invisible, essentially, which I think is important.
It's extremely important, because it's kind of funny as we're talking here, you can pinpoint certain stories in your life that had a significant impact on you, and recognize that and say, okay, how can I fill in that gap for the next generation?
Right.
How can I make a change? So I want to ask you something that I heard on another talk that you've done, and it's a little bit about masculinity.
Right.
Right now, I think a lot of kids growing up, they see the musicians with the cars and the women and the money and the guns and the strength, right? That's what it means to be a man. Okay. But you had mentioned that you went to see a movie with your young son, and you asked him after the movie, I can't remember.
Moonlight.
Yes.
Yeah, Moonlight, yeah.
And you asked him, what does masculinity mean? And he said, it is a performance.
Yeah.
Right.
So I asked him, like, we went to see the film, and I was a bit hesitant around seeing the film, just because it's the storyline is dealing with homosexuality in the Black community, right? Which is sort of like taboo. Great film. And, there were some scenes that came up. I was like, fuck, like, am I a bad parent for exposing my kid to this? And am I, all these different things. And afterwards we went to go and grab a bite to eat. And I was like, well, what is Black masculinity to you? How do you define it? And he was like, it's a performance. And for me, that was like this great moment for me as a parent, because I realized that my son at 14 was more evolved than I was at his age, and really into my 20s, And I think for me, the one thing I want my kids to take away is that I see masculinity as something that's plural, right? So masculinities, that, whether you're a trans man or you're a gay man, you're still a man, essentially, right? And it's okay to have different entry points into your maleness. And it's also important for any of my kids say, yo, I'm gay, or I'm a trans woman, or whatever, that they know that they're still loved, right? I've done workshops with men and women and asked the question, how would you respond if you came home and you saw your daughter engage in a relationship with a woman, versus how would that be different if you came home and saw your son being engaged in a romantic relationship with another man? And 80 to 90% of the response on both sides would be that, I'd be upset if I saw my daughter, but I would talk with her. But usually when it's around their son, there's like some real violent stuff, like real literal violence that comes up. And that's like their response is like, they can't go past that. Yeah, if you go past the violence, if you get me. In 2011, Black Daddies Club, we do a series of different discussions or different events, and we did this taboo dialogue called Queer as Black Folk. And the idea behind it came from talking to a Black father who was gay in Toronto at the time. And he was like, I'm sort of living this double-edged sword where from the Black community, I'm being ostracized because of my sexuality. And then from the predominant gay community or gay village, I'm ostracized because of my race. So for him, he was like, I have no real place I can call community. You know what I'm saying? And we had a discussion. We worked with, there's this dope woman here in Toronto called Kim Crosby, now Kim Crosby Milan, who moderated the panel. But we went into this, we went into a queer space called BQI, it's Black Queer Youth, it's held out of this health center in Toronto called Sherbourne Health Center. And there was a lot of young Black LGBTQ youth that were at this session, and we're sort of just having like a conversation. And a couple of takeaways. The first takeaway that I took away from that session was they were really surprised that there were like straight Black men in the space, because usually when there's dialogues around LGBTQ and the straight community, there's expectation that the Black LGBTQ folks have to go into straight communities, not the other way around, right? So the fact that we're going into the space that wasn't like ours, that sort of shifted the power and helped the dialogue. The other piece that I found was interesting was hearing these folks talk about, or the people in the room talk about their own experience with their own fathers, and how traumatic a lot of those experiences were because of the church or just because of like cultural or societal sort of upbringings. For me, that struck a chord. I was like, nah, I didn't want my kids to be in a similar space and talking about their, you know what I'm saying? Like, that makes sense, to have a similar experience, right? So, and this just kind of goes back to the point that you're saying, is like doing this work, it makes you become a better parent, you know what I'm saying? And a better human being, straight goods. And I think the approach to doing this work is lifelong learning, you know? Yeah, sorry.
Well, I think that's definitely commendable. And so to kind of back it up, you said something that I really resonates with me, in that you made it a parenting decision to go see this movie and have this conversation, talk to your kid and whatnot. And then you question yourself, like, is this something that I should be doing, whatnot? Mm-hmm. So how instrumental was the Black Daddies Club, or how did you kind of come through the other side and say, you know what, this is the right thing to do? Because I think a lot of parents are going to ask themselves that question: am I making the right decision?
Right. I mean, to be honest, I think that's a question that's continually, I don't know if that stops asking that question, to be totally honest, because up to this day, for different reasons, I ask myself those particular questions. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When my middle son was, I think, 7, we're in the car waiting for his grandmother to do like finish grocery shopping. And he was like, you know what, Pops? And this was the first time that I was engaged with this question. He was like, you know, I'm paraphrasing it, but he's like, I saw two guys kissing. What's up with that? And I was just sort of like, I wasn't expecting that. I was just doing the sad day chores. He was in the back seat. And I remember like really being scared at my response, because I felt that the next thing that I said, whatever my response is going to be, it's going to sort of like shape who this person is going to be. You know, his mom is a Christian. I'm not necessarily, you know, I'm spiritual, but not in the church. So our views are different in that aspect. He goes to a Catholic school. So it's like all these things are going in my head. And I'm also thinking about how do I respond in a way that he's going to understand at 7 years old. And I remember, you know, telling him something on the lines like, you know what, some men like women and some men like other men, but it's all love and it's okay. And he was like, okay, cool, you know? And I think sometimes parents, we shun from answering some questions because we don't have the answer, and we're scared to sort of like we don't know what to say, so we choose not to say anything. And I think that could be more harmful than not, because then they're going to seek those answers out, and they may go to a less more reputable source, i.e. one of their friends, and then they're just cycling bad information amongst them, right? So I think it's okay to have conversations, and I think recognizing that like that one conversation doesn't have to be the end of the conversation. It could be a starting point, and then we continued at a different point, trying to find like different teachable moments, so to speak. So like whether it's like driving in the car with my kids, and a hip hop song will come on and they're singing the lyrics, and there may be like questionable lyrics, and like, what is that? What's happening here? What's that person saying in the lyrics? And I think having these like opportunities to like conversate. I think growing up in our era, or my era, compared to my parents' era, I have social media, or I have the internet, that I put into my arsenal, my parenting arsenal. So what I mean by that is I will use a lot of media in terms of like movies or YouTube clips, to sort of like to get the conversation going, and then debrief on it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I think those things are sort of good, just because it gives them an engagement or an entry point that in a medium that they're comfortable in, if you get what I'm saying, versus like, son, let's talk about the birds and the bees right now, that they may be like, what, or just get turned off or whatever, but I don't know. Yeah, I think that my takeaway is just like, it's important to have that conversation, or at least try to start the conversation.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Brandon. I think that's probably one of the most important things that we as fathers do, is helping our children process all this information from all these outside sources. Like you said, we're kind of like the first generation of fathers who are dealing with the Twitter age and the Facebook age and the Instagram age and the TikTok. They're getting all these messages from all these different places.
Yeah.
It can sometimes be extremely toxic.
Sure.
Both to the way that they engage with others around them, but the way that they feel on the inside too, whether it's being bullied or not feeling secure, or maybe they don't have the right filter, they don't have the 6-pack abs.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I'd be remiss if I didn't make mention, as a Black parent, you're also dealing with having conversation with your sons and your daughters about anti-Black racism, right? So, seeing stuff like Eric Garner or Trayvon Martin, and then like, I remember walking in home from, I think I was at school or work, and I came in one night, this is years ago, and I saw, this is when the night that Eric Garner got shot. And it was like on CNN, but how it was happening, it was like, I wasn't sure if it was like real, if it was a movie, but I was there like fully triggered as this thing was happening, because I'm a black man in a big body that sort of like, like looks Eric Garner-esque, or Bigger Tomer-esque. And it's just like realizing that, like, like raising black boys is that like society's not, society is not shaped to love black men. You know what I'm saying? If anything, it's really, it's showing a constant showing of the hatred of black men, and how black men are sort of enemy of state. And I think it's important to, like, love, like I have to show, maybe it's over conversation, but I have to like show my sons extra love. This has to be like ground zero in terms of like, I see them and it's like a hug and a kiss on their forehead. It doesn't matter how old or tall they get. Because I know outside the space that they always have to sort of put on this mask sometimes, on performance to sort of survive out there. You know what I'm saying? And I think these are,
I think, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I think it's really hard for me as a white man growing up in America with a 3-year-old daughter. I'm never going to have that conversation about that you're going to have with your kids about, hands up and whatnot. And I think it's also extremely difficult to put ourselves in for me to put myself in your shoes. I'll never walk in your shoes. I'll never know exactly what it's like. And I've definitely had questions about that. Like, well, how much of this is just the media trying to trigger us? How much of this is just the Facebook algorithm just trying to get us all worked up? But time and time again, when I'm speaking to black fathers, they consistently have this message of, hey, this is a real problem. This is something I feel on a regular basis. And so,
well, I mean, in Toronto, and from what I see in the States, anti-black racism is real, right? And there's systemic racism, and it's real. Like, we see it in the school system. We see it in the criminal justice system. Like in Toronto, black and indigenous men are filtered out the school system at alarming rates and are filtered into the prison system at alarming rates. And the same thing for black women and indigenous women. When we look at, in the school system, like I see it within my 3 sons. Like, first of all, a lot of the administration and the teachers don't look like my kids. They're not necessarily even the same community. So when they come in at a certain age, my kids are like cute and, they're babies in the kindergarten stage, and it's like great. But then as they grow up into adolescence and they're developing like any other kids are doing at their age, the response is a lot more punitive. It's a lot more, suspension or sent to the office or sent to the class at like different rates compared to like the white counterparts, right? So I think it's like you have to have conversations with your kids and advocate for your kids, and also try to talk to your kids about how they can try to advocate for themselves. And it's tough because like sometimes you're like, I can see sometimes it's easy for a parent. It may be easier for a parent to be like, okay, can you not give as much trouble in the class? And they're like, yo, I wasn't doing this or this, that, and the fourth. And kids are going to say, they're going to say whatever to like not whatever. But because of, because I was also in the school system, I know how that can play out, right? I see it where, for a while they're having this carding situation where in areas where there was like high shootings or just whatever, that they're doing like a carding situation where basically what that means is that they could approach any citizen and ask them to produce ID without cause. So they can pull you over and if you're driving, or if you're just standing up and you look like a suspect or you look suspicious, they could come and approach you. However, when they did the data or they broke down the data, it seemed like 80% of the people that they're pulling down were black, right? So I think we have to be like, it's important to teach our kids to be critical, because then if you don't teach your children, your black children, to be critical or to have critical thinking, then they start to internalize that racism, right? Then they start to believe that they're shit or that they're bad, that they're negative. You understand what I'm saying? And I think the work that we're doing with Black Daddies Club and the work that as a Black father, regardless of the club, is really around trying to instilling hope. It's around instilling love, and also around instilling healing, not just in our children, but in ourselves. You understand what I'm saying? Because like we're also dealing with the same trauma. We're dealing with our own trauma rather, and try to parent on top of that. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, it's just like being mindful that you're not necessarily setting up your kids for feeling to be, you know, to be scared of leaving their houses, but they have to be aware, because then if something happens and I didn't do the job of like talking to them, then I didn't do my job.
Yeah. I mean, really, really deep stuff here, Brandon. Definitely. I mean, we could go on for hours and hours talking about this and how we can try to improve it. One of the things that really scares me is when you start looking at the prison populations and the number of Black men that are in the prison populations who are leaving kids at home, who grow up fatherless, and then end up, you know, being involved in violence and poverty and opiates. And it's alarming. It's something that really needs to be addressed. And I'm glad that you're out there trying to be a positive influence, putting yourself out there, making yourself available to the community, and growing things like that. It's really commendable, Brandon.
Thank you.
It's really awesome. So thank you so much for being on the show,
Thank
Brandon.
you, Mark.
Before I let you go, I've got some quick fire questions for you. Okay. A couple quick fire questions. So, favorite story to tell your kids. What's your favorite story?
To be honest, the stories that I do with my kids, a lot of it is impromptu. A lot of it is inserting their names into the stories. And it's sort of like to see themselves, because that came about not having enough, I didn't know about enough stories that like centralized Black, you know, little boys like themselves into like, you know, positive figures, if that makes any sense. And don't get me wrong, there's a whole bunch of books out there. I just wasn't connected to the bookstores when I was younger at their age, you know? So, and I also found it fun, like just making up stories, and they seemed more engaged when I was making up stories of, you know, young Elijah jumping on a rocket ship. Like that was more interested in Jack and the Beanstalk for them, you know? So I think that was, that's it. Like stories that included their names and all that stuff.
Very cool. It's funny you mentioned that, Brandon, because I was doing the same thing with my daughter today. And she was like, another story. I've never done it before until today.
Yeah. How did she take it?
Oh, she was loving it. I ended up just telling her stories for a half hour because she just wanted to hear more and more and more. So that's a really, I like that a lot. That's a cool one. Favorite movie?
My own personal favorite movie?
Yeah.
What comes to mind is Coming to America. That may change tomorrow if you ask me the same question, but right now, Coming to America is the first one that came to mind.
Eddie Murphy. Awesome. What about favorite vacation? Favorite place that you've gotten to go to with your kids?
We did the cruise the last couple of years. We did the cruise, and I think we went to Turks and Caicos. But it was this island off in one of the Bahamas island was just kind of cool, where it was sort of like just being by the water has been, I think anywhere in the water and it's hot is good.
Awesome. Favorite musical artist? Who are you listening to right now?
Dennis Brown, Bob Marley, but Dennis Brown. I would say Dennis Brown. I can't go wrong with Dennis Brown, which is, for folks who don't know, old reggae artist. Google him, but foundation music.
I really like reggae. I don't know who Dennis Brown is, so I'm going to
look him up, Mark.
Yeah. Will do. All right, final question here. You can sit down and talk to anyone in history. Who do you talk to?
I think right now it'd be my pops. It would definitely be my dad, to have that conversation and just to kind of check in.
Powerful. I love that. Brandon, once again, thank you so much. You guys got to check out Brandon Hay all over the place. You can find theblackdaddiesclub.com.